As we're all settling in, just testing the mic, it is rather unusual to be at AHIC and to have to avoid all the handshaking. So excuse me, Richard, for not doing that, also the hugs and the kisses. But it's great definitely to be here live with three gentlemen who are very well regarded and experienced to be diving into the journey to alternative management. I would like to introduce the panelists who I have met at least 13 years ago. That's when I landed in Dubai, but definitely you've been in this region much longer than that. Christophe Landé, you're probably CEO of Action Hotels, previously with Accor. He's been here for at least 15, 20 years. Khalid Anib, CEO of Abu Dhabi National Hotels. Equally, Khalid has been here for a long time. And Bani Haddad, partner at Alif Hospitality, a third-party management company. So if I could just start, also keeping in mind that we only have 30 minutes and we really want to talk about what is not necessarily just trending today. Franchising is happening. So while we sat here many years ago, over the last 15 years, talking about the evolution in management contracts and the franchising model, today it's actually happening. So if I can bore you, as usual, being a consultant, with a little bit of statistics, and our publication is available online, so feel free to look it up on HVS website. At the end of 2019, we had 700 branded hotels in the Middle East region. I'm assuming the total would be close to 1,000 hotels in total, with definitely a strong pipeline into 2025. This has been brought about by the operator really impacting the hospitality offering, also supported by government initiatives. But what it also shows that of these 700 hotels, 84 hotels were subject to a management agreement, 11 hotels were under a franchise agreement, and only 5% were lease models. And I think this is where we are now looking to focus, that with the new signings, there is approximately an additional 9% of the contracts being signed, bringing the total of franchise agreement to 20%. And therefore, it would be fair to say that this is not anymore just trending, it's happening. We should also comment that within the management operating model space, there has been also a lot of evolution on the terms, the flexibility of the operator, and the expansion plan. So maybe now, if we could just dive in specifically to understand, and I would like to say pre-2000 and post-2000 rather than really tie it to COVID, because when we look at hotel performance, when we look at values, but when we look also at this evolution, it wasn't just because of COVID. Definitely COVID had accelerated that, but these trends have started, and we want to explore what the next 10 years look like and what are the trends. So if I could start perhaps with you, Christophe, and take you back in time to the 2000s, at the time when you were wearing the operator hat, if that's the right way to describe it, and you were negotiating the very first franchise agreement in the Middle East region. And today, 20 years afterwards, what's different?
Well, I think everything has changed over 20 years. And I believe there are at least three main factors. The first one is the investors or owners are much more aware now, have much more understanding of what it's all about. So they are much more demanding. The second aspect, I think, is the competencies locally. 20 years ago, competencies were coming from Europe or from outside the Middle East. Now the competencies are there, coming from the Middle East. And the third aspect, which is much more linked to the, I think, operator. The operator has focused more on developing their brands than developing operational management. So therefore, you put that all together, the franchise model is becoming, I will say, the most sought after alternative for contract. Why? Because I think the investors now are not, I think a key priority for the investors is to be able to change the management. When you sign for a brand, the brand is developed at a global level, let's say. Maybe some kind of adaptation could happen locally, but globally, I mean, all the resources, the technology, the brand value is developed outside the The local management, but depends of how the local management is working. But their priority is for the brand, not the management. So that's why you can't be stuck for 20 years, let's say, with a management agreement if the management agreement locally is not living up to what you expect. That's why the movement to franchise leading to either, like we've done in Action Hotel, setting up our own resources to develop the management of those hotels, or to address third-party management. And I think this is really the way to go now. That's what I will recommend to anyone, is to sign what we call some franchise agreement, whereby you sign a management agreement, but you allow and you negotiate prior to move to franchise 3 or 4 years down the line.
Yeah, and it's definitely gaining more popularity. And you've again used the word flexibility, and that's probably something we will also discuss in detail, that it's not just about the competitiveness of these contracts, it's more the flexibility. But while I have you on this one in particular, because I know you've went through this exercise of converting all management agreements into franchise agreements for your properties, probably 9 or 10 properties, and you have a few in the pipeline. Again, if you are happy to share with us, I'd like to understand, from an operator's point of view, when they were resistant to this change, why? And as an owner, why was it very important that all the properties were converted?
I would say the resistance from the operator is somehow obvious. I mean, if you sign a contract for 20 years, whereby they will manage your property, so therefore their remuneration will be based also on their result, they're a bit reluctant to let that go initially. The experience we had in franchising all the Accor Hotel has been, I will say, excellent. I think it depends a lot of the collaborative element we have developed with the brand. The brands are strong. Like I said, they bring everything you need. Now you need to cooperate with them. But the operator is not so keen on actually to do operational management as such. Because first of all, they don't have necessarily the resources, and it's more and more true now. When you see all those mergers happening between recently with Accor, Starwood, and Marriott, the resources locally are not there. So therefore, they are quite opposed, at the opposite, to go to franchise to start with. Maybe they will keep certainly the prerogative to keep the luxury or ultra-luxury management to preserve their brand. But I will say from economy, mid-scale to upscale, I think there is no issue to discuss with them. At the opposite, they welcome the opportunity to do it because they can focus on their brand development, and the third-party management or the franchisee will focus on optimizing his asset.
Yeah, and this is also very relevant to when we look at the franchise agreements elsewhere, like in the US, 70% of hotels are franchised, and then in Europe, it's also gaining popularity close to 40%. And that's important and very relevant, as you rightly said, because most of your hotels are the economy and mid-scale, perhaps them giving out franchise agreements depending on the type of asset, but also the owner. And we will talk about also the owner capabilities and how it ties into franchising. So Khalid, if I can bring you into this conversation, because you have the experience and you can tell us, negotiating back then also with Christophe for the franchise property in Riyadh, but also because you currently have in your portfolio of hotels managed and franchised properties.
As you clearly mentioned, I had the pleasure to negotiate and to convert few hotels with my friend Christophe, who used to be my boss and then became, the partner actually. And then it was not easy. You remember, it was not easy, but we did it at that time. It was back in 2013, 2014, 2012, 2013. Look, the franchise and the managed model, they share a lot of fundamentals are similar. They have similar fundamentals with one exception, which is the profitability and the bottom line, which within my experience and we have done in Saudi and also in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, the profitability is clearly higher. And that goes through all the pillars. I mean, starting from I would say the development cost, it's lower than if it's the managed management hotel who are behind running that process. The pre-opening expenses are usually a lot higher when it's the operator who is managing the process. The top lines within the franchise hotel are higher, and that can be checked through STR reports. I mean, we can have the, you know, to look at these numbers. And then the game is within that, also the big game, I would say, is within that component of operational expenses, which are extremely well managed when it's the franchise model. Some people, they might think that the fees structure, there is massive benefit in franchising the hotel through the manner, but that's not, the game is not there. It's relevant, but it's not the big game. The big game is in managing the cost. So that ultimately would give you better profitability. Now, having said that, I wouldn't, and as I always said, I wouldn't recommend to anyone without experience to go and franchise a hotel unless he is willing to establish a proper structured management company behind. But in this case, he should have multi-units, otherwise it doesn't make sense financially. Or the other alternative, of course, is to be linked with a third-party management company, and that even with paying the franchise fee and still paying the fees to that third-party management, he will end to have higher profitability than the managed model.
Yeah, and that was exactly the point I wanted to clarify, Khalid, because obviously, as you said, it's a risk and reward, whether you have the capability to achieve those savings. Now, arguably on the pre-opening, we can see the obvious savings. Oftentimes with the franchising fees and then adding up the third party, and that's something also we'll discuss more with Bani. But if I do the simple maths, it could be, again, somewhere in the 9 to 10% of total revenues. Like for like, with the flexibility of operators now in the traditional hotel management agreements, this is not a big difference. So I guess here what is being suggested, that it's not just about those savings when
Absolutely.
you have the team, but then building that structure to actually be able to manage efficiently and improve the bottom line.
Absolutely, absolutely. As you clearly said, I mean, the game, it's not the fees itself. Again, the third-party manager, his fees are linked to a clear, measurable performance.
Yeah.
So there is a threshold where that fees would kick in. Whether the operators, usually the fees, it's a bit tougher in it. Plus, you know, there is the basic fee and there is the performance fee, but there are a lot of other fees in the middle, and that you need a gas factory engineer to understand those. Whether in the franchise model, it's a bit straightforward.
Those that in the buzzword we call them the hidden fees.
The hidden.
But that takes us nicely into
things,
exploring with Bani, the third-party management model. But I would like to start with a question, Bani, that actually puzzled me when I was looking at the findings. I have an explanation, but would like to hear from you. When we look at the operators' reluctance to franchise properties in the Middle East, and only 11% of the contracts are franchised. On the other hand, 25% of hotels in Africa operate under a franchise model. To me, it may sound like the operators, they're reluctant to go to Africa, perhaps because they don't have the right setup or infrastructure. But it does shock me that if operators are not willing to give unless the owner is sophisticated or has a third-party management agreement, what could explain the 25%? If we could start from that, what's your point of view, having done also a lot of deals in Africa, and then also talk us through where do you add value to owners?
Sure. Well, I mean, we know Africa very well. We're the leaders there by far. And you're right, yes and no. So the first thing you see, there's a
You're
cultural...
disagreeing with me, Bani.
There's a cultural shift that is happening when it comes to hotel management. One of them, all of you here, are calling the brands operators. And this is only in the Middle East. They're not operators. They are brands. And sometimes they act as operators. And you look at the portfolio of Hilton, Marriott, IHG, Wyndham, etc. I mean, the least has 76% of its global portfolio franchised. And Wyndham is up, I mean, Hilton and Wyndham are above the 90%. So these are franchising companies, essentially. They're not operators. In the region, Middle East specifically, traditionally, they built such a huge infrastructure that it made financial sense for them to manage. And the assets, so compared, coming back to your question, compared to Africa, the assets were much bigger in terms of number of keys. The RevPARs were much higher. So there was a financial element which justified for them to build this large infrastructure locally. In Africa, it wasn't the case. Typically in Africa, the hotels, when you say 150 rooms hotels in Africa, that's a large hotel. That's one. Rightly so, the location, managing in Addis Ababa, managing in Zanzibar, etc., is not like managing in Dubai, right? So it makes it a little bit more complicated. But where you're not completely right is that it has been changing significantly in the Middle East, and COVID just accelerated this. So with the drop in performance since 2008, we have seen in the market, in the GCC, a large shift from management to franchise. Why? Because owners all of a sudden started looking, say, oh, wow, these management contracts are actually costing me a lot. Maybe there's a better way. And this is where, people like us come into play and say, yes, there is a better way. In mature markets, the US, Europe, this is how hotels are managed. And the reason hotels are managed by independent hotel company or independent operators is to remove this little bit of a conflict of interest when the brand is managing. Why? Because the brand, and rightly so, their main asset is the brand, and they have to take care of the brand. So when Khalid mentions these extra expenses in between the base fee and incentive fee, this is where they take care of the brand. And that's why we love them, because the brands are great, right? But this is where the conflict of interest lies as well. And an independent operator removes this conflict of interest. So you have someone who's acting on behalf of the owner while keeping the brand equity, preserving the brand equity, but maximizing the profits for the owner. And all studies show that in a hotel franchised, operated by third-party management companies tend to generate 5 to 10% higher GOPs, which is massive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you're definitely right. We're seeing, as I said, this trend increasing with 20% now of the branded hotel supply being under the franchise. And probably this is also for the operator, the assurance to have a third party. Again, what I heard Christophe say earlier on, and Khalid, they have built their in-house capabilities. So I'm assuming you're not outsourcing to the third party. You are acting as a third party internally, Khalid and Christophe. Where do you come into this, Bani?
Listen, I mean, in my previous life, when I was running Wyndham, I was always telling, because we were primarily franchising, and I was always telling investors, listen, if it's only for one hotel, it doesn't make sense for you to. You need to at least have 5 to make one financial sense, but also having a stability in the hotel operation. It's not about just hiring one general manager, and then this general manager, no matter how great he is, typically after 2-3 years he's going to leave, and quality performance will drop. So, but if a company like Action, like ADNH, I mean, they hold large portfolios and they have a vision to grow this portfolio possibly, then it makes financial sense for them to create an in-house capability to manage their hotels. And our role is, we always advise. We are one brand agnostic, and we are also in-house advisors in many cases to hotel developers. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't make sense for us to be involved, we just say it, and that's the case with Action Hotel. We did have a discussion, and it didn't. There was no sense for us to be involved. There was no added value that we could bring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this all boils down again to the operational expertise. But now that you have, and that question is specifically to both of you, Christophe and Khalid, now that you have the in-house capabilities, which is costly, I agree with you, Bani. We've advised also our clients, if it's just one hotel, setting up and minimizing the risk of failing is expensive. So you need to strike the right balance. I'm assuming with the number of properties you're running and managing, you have created the infrastructure to support the operations. The next step would be for you to go out and do third-party management services.
Well, you're absolutely right, Alain. I think we have the structure to do more than we have. And we were seriously considering before the COVID pandemic, who had been a big blow for everyone, to look for some hotels, branded hotel on the franchise that we could manage. And I think we can, the credibility we have is to say that we own hotel, we know what the investor is looking for, and we can deliver that. Versus the brand. The brand, before the COVID already, did not have necessarily the resources to be hands-on, really. And this is what the investor is waiting for. But it's even worse now after COVID. I mean, it's not a secret. And when you hear Marriott laying off 800 people, I believe, Accor about 1,000 people. And clearly the message which is sent by the brands is to say focus on the hotel who are bringing added value to you and generating money. So if you have some hotel, independent hotel on his own who are not on that level, definitely you will not be supported. I mean, clearly, if you take an example, a Novotel hotel will bring maybe $100,000 of fees to the operator. So, and a five-star hotel will bring millions of dollars of fees. So where the operator is going to focus on, it's not on you, it's on the one who is bringing the money. And see, they have less resources. So this is, I think we have an edge here to develop, where we can bring added value to some hotel who wants to move to franchise and to be operated. And still they have the benefit to change the management if they want to, and maybe to go to a third-party management if it doesn't work with us. So I think it's a win-win situation there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Khalid, I've heard you a few times talk about, and this ties into the know-how, and the key role in a hotel is the GM.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The GM is the key role, is the man who plays it all at the hotel. But as Bani explained, it's not enough to have just that good GM. It's very important to have a structure behind the GM, because the GM may leave any time, and then, you know, who's going to manage the hotel? So this brings me again to the fact that a sole owner, I mean, with one unit owner, it's very risky to hire the GM, even though the GM is the man, you know, he's the one who makes everything at the hotel. But that also brings me to say, and just what to add to what Christophe mentioned with regard to the capabilities in-house, I think we shouldn't stigmatize anymore whether the third-party management or owner who manage, which is owner capabilities. We should not, you know, stigmatize with the 3-4-star hotel. I don't agree. In fact, we have, you know, the 5-star property that we manage on a franchise model, and we believe that can be extended to even higher level. I am not going beyond the luxury, I mean the entry level 5-star, or we call it the entry luxury, but anything below Four Seasons, Mandarin Oriental, I mean, I don't know, Park Hyatt, Raffles, I think that could be considered, you know, as to be managed, because it's not very sophisticated. Now, I wouldn't go and manage a Rixos hotel, because there are some specificity in that model that we don't have that expertise, but a straightforward hotel, I think that, and we will see that in the region.
The reason I specifically asked about the GM or key personnel, and I'm going to wear the operator's hat for a second, frankly, so that this is a balanced conversation. The operator is saying, Mr. Owner, you wanted to negotiate the term. We have reduced it. You wanted to negotiate the fees, pay me higher incentive when I perform. We will agree to that. You wanted control over appointment of personnel. We have given it to you. What I'm hearing from this conversation, that it is not just about those. The question today for the operator is how much more flexibility is the owner looking for? So it wasn't just those traditional terms that perhaps 10 years ago were very important. It is beyond that. It is about exit strategy. It's about the sale of the asset. It's actually having the control over this property, because you're putting skin in the game.
If I may, I tell you, so typically we always tell our owners there are 3 buckets where we add value. One is the financial aspect, where we generate higher profits for all the reasons we've mentioned. 2, the second bucket are the contractual terms, including the exit, including the performance, including the right to appoint, including the right to approve the budget, etc. So many. And the third bucket, which in many cases is the most important one, is the flexibility, the focus, so everything related to the human aspect. And because companies like ours are typically human-sized, we're not managing thousands of hotels, we give the hotels and the investor the attention they need. And at the end of the day, when you consider someone who's putting 20, 30, 50 million, 100 million in an asset, when he wants to pick up the phone, he really needs someone to answer and take action immediately. So these are the 3 buckets where we add value, and this is why this model is so successful.
Yeah, I do fully agree. The third one is extremely important. It's the fact that it's human size that makes a big difference. Those larger operators, they take ages for just taking a decision. The gentleman who is here, he doesn't have that decision. He needs to discuss it with home somewhere else, and that create a lot of delays, and of course it harmed the profitability and the performance of the hotel.
So I'm conscious of time. We have 5 minutes. Just checking in with Richard if we have any perhaps questions that are coming through the app. And while you're doing that, just generally speaking, I know Bani, you spoke about the opportunity, and you're seeing this increasing opportunity in the Middle East. Are there any other trends that either you, Khalid, or Christophe, that you're seeing? Especially now with the changes that are brought about with COVID and moving forward, anything new that perhaps?
I think what we would see is, considering these current circumstances or unfortunate circumstances and consequences, we would see the lease model that will grow in the region. I anticipate that to kick in, because I would foresee that a lot of assets will be eventually, unfortunately, taken by banks or institutions, and these people, what is matter for them, it's that payment that would be made on a monthly basis. This is how I would see. I don't know what.
From our perspective, what we're seeing is the rise of, and I think there's a panel right after us, the rise of soft brands or the collections, for independent hotels who want to join a larger distribution network. So that's one thing. So and it's basically being pushed both by the brands, the international brands who are launching collections and soft brands, etc., but also by these independent. That's one. And the second one is actually the use of the hotels, the usage. So more and more the hotel is becoming a place to work as well, and because at the end of the day it's real estate, so you need to maximize your square meters. And that's why we're seeing co-working entering hotels, for example. So, and I think this trend will continue.
I think we're going to take a question from Richard.
There are more comments than questions, but they might provoke a quick response.
Sure.
Scott writes, it's interesting, Christophe, once a brand operator, has had an epiphany as to the merits of franchise and more hands-on cost management when the costs are now coming out of his P&L. And Scott says, that says it all about the current state of play. Does anyone want to come back on that to Scott?
Sorry, I didn't get what you were saying. I can't hear very well from here.
So is my microphone on? It is now. Oh, yes, it is now. So Scott has made a comment and says this. Interesting that Christophe, once a brand operator, has had an epiphany as to the merits of franchise and more hands-on cost management when the costs are now coming out of his P&L. And Scott says, that says it all about the current state of play.
Well, I think it's very true that I did realize moving on the other side, actually, that the owner and the franchisee, actually, are bringing a much more leader in terms of change. than is the operator. Operator is at time could be stuck within the brands and what he could do or not do. The franchisee or the third-party management are much more proactive in finding solutions to improve either the revenue or the optimizing the cost. Yeah.
The voice of reason on this is Patrick, I think. Patrick says franchising and management contract propositions are very different. Both can work well if the fundamental operating experience is in place. So a note of diplomacy from Patrick.
Great. If that was it, I'm just going to conclude. Well, we don't have time, but I still want to talk briefly. I wanted to conclude on a softer note and ask about soft brands, because we have looked at least growing in this part of the world, but specifically on the soft brand. That's also an option for operator. That saves them at times the PIP, associated expenditure, and it also allows them to continue to be tied to and benefit from the operator. Do you see soft brands gaining more popularity?
Big time.
And a role for you to play in that
as well? Of course.
Okay.
And again, it depends on the market, but you still have out there in the Middle East and in Africa a large inventory of unbranded hotels.
Yeah.
And these are paying, very expensive fees for the OTAs, for example. So by joining a soft brand, then they automatically reduce their distribution costs.
And arguably bigger savings to the owner, because even the owners are paying when they enter into the soft branding agreement versus the rigid agreements. They are paying very different fees, so it could be also a win-win. Okay, that brings us exactly on the dot to a conclusion, but thank you all for sharing with us and telling us more about how you have also been behind transforming from management to franchising agreement. Thank you to everyone who's with us in the room and everyone who's live. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.